Okay, now that we've covered from 1940s through to 1990s, a big deal happened in 1991. As I mentioned earlier, the economy opened up and liberalization meant that we had now a chance to see what was happening globally. Insofar, we had limited access. Those who traveled abroad probably came back with stories. VCR, as in video VHS tapes, were the other source of watching Hollywood content. But suffice to say, it was not as prevalent across all socioeconomic stratas of the country. That kind of changed in post 1990s and thereabouts. And so some of this had an impact on the movies. So if you think of the movies made up until say the 90s, large part of the locations, shootings and everything were done within the country. And India in itself is, like I mentioned in the geography section of the series, there is everything that you want. There are jungles, there are the desert, there is coastline, there is snow-capped mountains, there are caves, plains, whatever that you want, it's there. Is there a express need to travel out? Probably not. But what happened was, because of the economy opening up, more and more people began traveling. The tourism to other countries saw a significant uptick. As a result, the familiarity with foreign locales became very evident. One of the big impacts of that was evident in Mr. Yash Chopra's movies. Think of Chandni back then, and so the landscape of Switzerland was captured so well, and it was like a welcome change for the Indian audience, which were used to seeing some of the common Indian locations. There's also a factor that it became increasingly difficult to shoot within the city. Congestion, traffic, and everything kind of exploded, and so it was very difficult to shoot within city limits. And so increasingly, filmmakers had to go outside or shoot very late in the night. But gradually, that also needed a lot of permissions and all that. So more focus therefore was to find newer locations, and with the economy opening up, people making that much more money, people began traveling, and shooting a movie abroad or a sequence abroad wasn't that alien. And therefore it probably started with song sequences, the dream sequences which were abroad, and then they would come back to the country. And eventually many movies, as we closed in on around 2000, many movies were shot completely off location and out of India. And so the period of 90s to 2000, or I'd probably say 94, 95 through to say 2005, that phase saw a emergence of new filmmakers who wanted to break away from the typical formula films of the previous 2 decades. And so you saw a Kayamat Se Kayamat Tak, Amir Khan's first adult star. No, no, not adult as in that adult, as in grown up. He was a child actor before that, just so that you know. These days you have to be politically correct, right? So, so as a grown up star, one of his performances was very well appreciated along with Ms. Jui Chawla's. That movie, directed by Mr. Mansoor Khan, was, the treatment itself was very different. It's a classical tragic love story, loosely based on Romeo and Juliet. And one could see that the treatment itself was, the technical aspects of the movie, the artistry levels were slightly elevated, and it was a box office success. And then came Mr. Salman Khan with Maine Pyar Kiya, and some of the other movies in the 90s, which were absolute blockbuster uh, family entertainers. And I'll touch upon this in the mathematics section. In the next section is why family films rule the roost as a box office return of investment. Um, and so post 95, 96, we saw a lot of Hollywood content or Western content filtering into the living rooms of many Indian households. Right now, almost everybody was gearing up towards cable TV, and if you remember, we had something called Star Plus, part of I think Fox, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that, but Murdoch family oriented businesses, right? So Star TV had lovely uh, binge worthy series back then, though it was all weekly. Think of picket fences and some of the others. So a lot of Western influence crept into Indian living rooms, and so the audience began expecting something different. That can we see a Swiss location that became the go-to. So you will see a series of movies from 95 through say 2005 or thereabouts, where foreign locales became the in thing. So the NRI crowd got NRI as a non-resident Indian, or the Indians who are residing abroad in other countries, and so predominantly the folks were in US or in England or in other parts of Europe. They were the filmmakers figured that there is an audience there. Why just focus on the Indian audience? So the song and dance sequences changed with the advent of a gentleman called Mr. Shamak Davar. The choreography became a little more westernized. The music industry also changed with a more technical, upbeat kind of techno music kicking in. Albeit there were instances even in the 70s or 80s with a gentleman called Mr. Bappi Lahiri, who was heavily influenced by the disco um, culture at the time. But it kind of set the tone of, it was like I told you in the 70s. So 40s to 70s was almost a similar, or like 40s to 60s was similar type of stories. 60s to 70s were very similar. Then 70s to mid 80s or early 80s were similar. 80s to 1995 were very similar. And so 95 to 2005 or 2010 saw the advent of internet, foreign content, and so it had an impact on the main narratives. But the star culture continued, and with the advent of Mr. Amir Khan, Mr. Salman Khan, and Mr. Shah Rukh Khan with Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, DDLJ. So what Sholay did to Mr. Amitabh Bachchan in 1975 is, or 77 was it? Is what Dilwale Dulhaniya did to Mr. Shah Rukh Khan. It completely altered. It appealed to the romantic youth of the country. Clearly the youth of the country were not as expressive till say around the 90s, as in the youth of people who were in their 20s in 1970s were still, largely quiet, shy by nature, not very well exposed globally, generalizing. But the youth of 2000 was already, very uh, tilting towards capitalism, right? And so very well spoken, better traveled, better informed, and so they were more expressive. And so they immediately identified with DDLJ. The songs were stellar, the locales were fabulous, it was shot very well, and the story really appealed because it had comedy, tragedy, romance, everything. But broadly, it was a rom com, right? And so that kind of put a trajectory of the movies in a slightly different direction. And so, and this is a point I wanted to make earlier as well. Now, when some of you review a movie, iconic movie like Sholay, like I mentioned, or Diwar, Amitabh Bachchan starrer, Mr. Shashi Kapoor, directed by Mr. Yash Chopra, or you review something like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, a mainstream popcorn rom-com kind of a movie, it might not appeal to your senses. Please understand that there are technical problems with the movie. The script has a lot of problems. There are problems, right? Because one thing is that you are viewing it with the lens of say 2022 for a movie which was made 20 years earlier, or in the case of Sholay or Diwar, which was made 40 years earlier or whatever. And so one has to be mindful and watchful of that part, that hindsight is always 2020, right? Whenever you look back, when I look back at say Ben-Hur, it could have been done a little differently, or North by Northwest, or Psycho for that matter, if you go back really far back, or if you go into the 70s, think of, like I said, Scarface. And I keep coming back to, could Godfather be have done differently? I think not. And I wouldn't, and there are exceptions, right? But I guess you get the drift. There are movies which, on hindsight, one could have done it a little differently. For example, Godfather Part 3 could have been done a little differently, or probably not needed, in my opinion. One was brilliant, and two was better or great or equal, but that's where it should have finished. But like, likewise, right? So beware that you are viewing something which is technically behind Hollywood of the same period, right? Technically, from a technical standpoint. And so the quality of film is lower, the audio is lower, the cinematic maturity is also lower in some sense. And so the artistry will therefore only focus on the story, and the story might not resonate well with you because of the cultural differences or the lack of awareness of the culture. So for you will hear this from many Indians that a movie like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge is not to be, it's not like an Oscar best picture kind of a movie. It's like an experience, it's an emotion. I met my first love while watching DDLJ. I met my future wife at this thing, or my future husband in there. There's plenty of stories like that. So it is more of an emotion, it's more of an experience, and that's, I know it's very unique to India, if you will. You might not resonate with it in the US or in Europe, but in India, people do get it. Like, I mean, when Mr. Bachchan was mouthing those "Let me give it back to you" kind of dialogues, people actually loved it. They just got sucked into his character, like completely into it, as it were. And so all other things were kept aside, technicality, all those kind of things, right? On which you measure the quality, the artistic merit of a cinema. And so Dilwale was one such movie, right? And it's one of those pivotal moments which kind of Switzerland would have to rethink about its economy, or Indian tourism, right? I mean, they must have seen a hockey stick curve, or a uptick in Indian tourism post Dilwale Dulhaniya, and so it kind of transitioned and put Mr. Shah Rukh Khan in the upper echelons of stardom, popularity. There were other stars like Mr. Salman Khan and Mr. Amir Khan, but these three gentlemen ruled the box office from an Hindi cinema standpoint. Mind you, right now we are still sticking to Hindi cinema. In the meanwhile, quietly and slowly, the southern cinema and somewhat the eastern cinema were generating, because they had low budget, right? So their challenge was little different. Their challenge was, I have this much budget, I have to make the most of it. My storytelling is for this particular section of the audience, and so I will ensure I push the envelope. So Tamil cinema did that with Mr. Kamal Hassan in multiple. So Mr. Kamal Hassan, Mr. Mani Ratnam as the director. Kamal Hassan is arguably one of the finest actors. Um, Artistic merit, right? And not star as what I mean. He is a star, of course, but from an artistry standpoint, right? Unfair to compare again, just for a reference to context. Mr. Kamal Hassan, if I were to give you a Western counterpart, would probably be very similar to, say, a Mr. Phillips Seymour Hoffman from a look and feel, stature, gravitas standpoint. I mean, again, please don't get sensitive if one is not comparing one with the other, or one's credibility. Mr. Kamal Hassan has been there for a much longer time than Mr. Seymour Hoffman, late Mr. Hoffman. But I'm just giving you the feel of Mr. Daniel Day-Lewis, if that's what you want to say, because he's portrayed so many shape-shifting characters, if you will. And so, South Indian cinema, the Bengali cinema, were generating these one-off wonders, which were like, wow, which were then remade into Hindi, because Hindi was now ruling the mainstream consciousness, and we are into 2010 right now. That again, in my view, and I could be wrong on this, but kind of changed the landscape of the movies with the advent of YouTube and social media. I mean, pre-iPhone and post-iPhone, right? Pre-App Store and post-App Store. So 2007 is when I think iPhone was introduced. It came into India around 2008 or 2009 and became, or the app economy kind of arrived by 2010 or 12 or thereabouts. That kind of changed the landscape all over again. in the sense that suddenly the average moviegoer was that much more aware. The younger audience, born post 1990s and post 95, they became more vocal, more aware. They were born into internet, right? The Gen I, if you will. And so the three generations, like the Gen X, the millennial, and the Gen I, got into the creative pursuits with different sensibilities. And so there was competition to come up with better cinema. And so again, we started seeing an uptick of good movies, largely still following safe bet formulaic movies, but the percentage of artistically artistic merit, high artistic merit movies went up post 2010. And I would say from 2010 through till date, through till pre-pandemic, till 2020, the number of movies that were which will appeal to, say, Western sensibilities went very high, and as did the South Indian film industry, whereas the Bengal film industry, these are the major hubs, right? That's why I keep referring to them. They did produce some good movies, but the focus, the highlight, post 2015 or thereabouts, was with the Malayalam film industry, the Tamil industry, the Kannada or the Telugu film industry. They were just churning out one after the other. Oh my God, I haven't seen something like this. Oh my God, this is what I want. And so the arrival of the concept, which is what they are calling it now, is like the pan India movie, which appeals to not just one region or section of society, but to a larger section. And and then everything changed post pandemic. During pandemic, what happened was, one of the big revelations, realizations that happened was, there are other people who act as well. So, I mean, I'm generalizing and simplifying. Large part of the movie going audience was like the star culture. Right? I will only watch a Shah Rukh Khan. I will only watch this Mr. Akshay Kumar or what have you, or Mr. Devgan. Likewise, or Mr. Rajnikant in the south, or Mr. Kamal Hassan, and everyone. And suddenly you realized during the pandemic that there is Mr. Nawazuddin Siddiqui with Sacred Games. It just, if you haven't watched that, watch season one. You get absolutely like, oh my God, this is serious stuff. This is seriously artistic. It merits artistic brilliance, story, editing, cinematography, lighting, sound design, excuse me, and the whole works. And therefore, the other people who were always around, mind you, it's not that they just arrived on the scene in 20, they were doing some good work all along. So, Mr. Nawazuddin Siddiqui, Mr. K.K. Menon, Mr. Vijay Raz, Mr. Sanjay Mishra, Mr. Pankaj Tripathi, Mr. Manoj Bajpayee, and many other. I'm just naming the male stars, not to ignore the ladies. Miss Rasika Duggal, Miss Shefali Shah, Miss Radhika Apte, Miss Diska Chopra, and many more. And it's incredibly difficult to mention all of them, so forgive me. But they were just thrown onto the web series platforms, and like, wow, Mr. Elawat, Jaideep Elawat did a series called Patal Lok. And people were like, wow, where were you all this while? I mean, such powerful performances. Mr. Neeraj Kavi did such powerful, and he did a very good movie called Ship of Theseus. If you haven't seen that, must watch that. And these kind of actors were always there, but they were always, they were not, they're in the background. The foreground was always this larger than life protagonist, hero, as it were. And so, even what also changed was the advent of meteor roles for the female leads. Insofar, barring, say the 40s to 60s had some female strong characters. Then in 70s it kind of went down because the hero or his character was the only thing, and the heroine or the actress was like relegated to song and dance sequences running behind the trees and just a cursory customary presence, and that lasted up until say from 70s up until 2000 or thereabouts, where the Hindi film heroine or Indian film heroine was usually for romantic relief, as it were, or song and dance or dream sequence, or there were not enough strong women protagonist character led movies. There were like, there are exceptions, right? All through these 4 decades, there have been one or two such movies which had uh, great performances by, think of if you go back, Miss Shabana Azmi, Miss Smita Patil, and many others, right? So all of them, but they were not enough. They were clearly not enough. But that kind of changed. Like, oh my God, now there are other actors out there and they are doing some amazing jobs. And if you haven't seen some of the short movies, they're available on YouTube. You must give them a watch to get a sense. And in one segment, I'll also tell you how to ease into Indian cinema. You just don't jump in straight at the deep end of the pool. How do you get it like a step by step way into it? So that will be in the following next segments. And so here we are in end of 2022, getting into 2023, where I covered the history of evolution of Indian cinema, more tilting towards Hindi cinema, and clearly some bits on the non-Hindi cinema. Where it stands today, it's in a much better, artistically richer place than what it was ever in the past. So that is there for sure. In the next segment, friends, I'm going to talk about the mathematics of it. Why is it the way it is? Why do we make such movies? Why did it happen that the quality of the movies went down? What is this return of investment? What is paisa vasool? And what role does that mathematics play in movie making? Stay tuned.